If you see it up front, you don't want to be all the way to the back. It's such a big room, you might not be able to hear anybody.
You find it interesting. The other rooms are all, you've got an outlet each desk.
Yeah, yeah.
Here we are in here. And
you got to go on the wall while I'm getting that.
All right, well, I think I'm recording now. I hope I'm recording. I should fire up a QuickTime screen recorder just to be saying that. Let's see.
Yes, it's you. I'm not in, no reports. I don't even know. I don't control it.
Probably not.
Big problem with that.
Yeah, this is the first time I left my big laptop at home.
accidentally or deliberately?
Oh, purposely.
Oh.
I just got this MacBook Air this week, so it's like, yeah, I'm just trying it out.
Why would I do that?
Yep.
I can still remember one time, because I worked clear across Atlanta from where I live, and I can remember arriving one day and realizing I brought my laptop bag with my laptop. I gotta go back home.
Oh yeah, you get that point of no return of like, oh, but I've come so far, but I can't do anything. Damn it!
I mean, I still have two with me.
Especially since I am the network admin, sysadmin there, and also do development. So.
Yeah. Oh, one man army.
Yeah.
Yeah, I still have
That's
two.
what happens when you spend time on your own learning.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, definitely.
I mean, I got right after I got out of college. My idea of leisure reading at that time, back in the 70s, would be I'd be reading manuals. You know, what got really strange was a year or two later, I got a job as an operator for a place that used Burroughs machines. Of course, I read the manuals for that. And the two different manual styles actually brought something of a culture shock. You know, the way IBM writes manuals and the way Burroughs wrote manuals, there was some definite differences. Of course, they used to say back at that time that by the time the IBM machine got to the market, it was obsolete. Burroughs got their stuff out 6 months before it came obsolete, but there was still problems. So, definitely different companies.
My first job was working on AS400s for IBM. Doing AS400 and OS400 stuff. Boy, that was something.
I got to play with Burroughs music systems, as they call it, and then they had what they call the B1000 series. And they were really interesting machines because the processors were marked up. Instead of being hardwired, they were programmed. The microphone, the memory was bit addressable. So when you get a context switch from running a program that was rigid at a Fortran and wanted to have a COBOL, not only changed the instruction code for the CPU, it also changed the word size.
Yeah, that's kind of crazy.
Yeah, but the thing is, if you had one of those and you wanted to emulate some other computer, if you had the case, you could sit down and write your microcode and you probably do it. Enough about dinosaur age.
I think to this day still supports OS400, AS400 options stuff up in upstate New York. It's his entire distance. There aren't a lot of out there anymore. So
No.
if you find somebody that has it,
Well,
you know what to do with it.
There were government agencies still running the Scratch a couple, 3 decades after it was discontinued.
Okay.
And what was it, not long ago, a few years ago, we were doing software, actually indirectly for the Army. they had a robotic arm that was controlled by a dead general.
You can't kill them.
Remember that? You know, and of course, they've long been obsolete. Out of business. I mean, this was 20 years after Navy General was going out of business.
I worked I did stuff for the DoD in DC back in mid-2000s, and still running Windows 3.1 on stuff. And you're like, how are you?
It's still
It didn't break yet. So
well, at least we're not doing what they used to do. One of the birthplaces I worked in, what they used to do when they came up with new mainframe, they would do an emulator for the previous one. So it's a question of bother them because you can still run the software. They had a thicker payload package. You can still run the old software on the new one. Still be changing as well. Some places you can run 3-4 levels of interpreter on the latest machine, but you're still running software.
I still got our Windows 3.1 computer at home. I don't turn it on.
I'm sure I got one too.
I got a few on the rack.
Actually, the DOS machine I can pull out to run over X-Ways.
I think I last booted about 4 years ago.
It'll still work.
Who knows? It's just like, I wonder if that'll still work.
Actually, yeah. That's actually why I turned it on. I hooked up the monitor, plugged in the keyboard, turned it on, went, plugged in the mouse, and went, cool. I've seen enough of that shit.
So that was a fun half-hour experience booting up.
That's nice. Okay, I'll put that back down.
Emily, no JavaScript now, so awesome. All right.
I think you was not machine out. Play the old typewriter game way back. And that and Wing Commander.
Yeah.
So it's a question of what's going on in these companies.
Just trying to give everybody a few minutes to get back from lunch, but we left. We were worried about getting back. We went back downtown to check out some brewery, the terminal. Yeah, terminal. It was good. Good food. Upstairs. I mean downstairs. I think there was a large party upstairs on the right after they opened. It was good food.
One of the few times I went there, I set up this pretty good sized group, and we sat upstairs all the way back in. So some of us were actually in there. Once we were in there, we were in there.
Oh yeah. Well, it was a cool place. I used to work at a microbrewery when I was in college, so I mean, it's many years there. So every time I go out of town, I like to try to see what's there, what they have, try the brews, and I mean, it was nice atmosphere. First time in Chattanooga too, so it's enjoying it so far. Check it out a little more tonight.
It is a lot of automation stuff. That's what I do care. Like one machines, measuring machines, JSD stuff that pop in. So yeah, it's the same thing where it's $20, $30, $40 piece of machinery goes down because what is now, every time $100 hard drive now is just findable. If you go to the store buy a $5 flash drive, that's 15 times the size. That does work. So. Yeah, you're on top of the adapter. The easy chain together.
I had a short time I kept the CD that I literally wrote floppy on it, and I was using it as a CDR CD. And anytime I wanted to put more data on it, I kept it in rewrite mode. I just added more data to it.
So, I think you could probably go ahead and get started, huh? Okay. All right. So yeah, this is DevOps, not just a buzzword. My name is Will Jackson. I am a senior developer with New Valley Media. We are based out of Macon, South Carolina. We mostly do support work. However, we do a fair amount of full builds. We, as a company, have been working with Drupal since, I'd say, the 4.7, early 5 days. We've worked with a variety of companies, large companies, small. Work with have a lot of partners. So. It's a nice opportunity to kind of see how other shops actually get out there and do their, do developments, the different practices, the different workflows, the different options that people may have. So for this talk, we're going to talk about DevOps. It's the concatenation of development operations, if you did not already know that. The biggest thing is just establishing the process. So the process, when does it begin? What is the process? Well, a lot of people like to talk about Jenkins, like to talk about all the specific tools to do automated testing and things like that. But in this talk, we're actually going to talk about how to start that process early on, how to leverage the tools of the trade, and how to follow Drupal best practices, always, always, always. There's a reason why you're not doing it, then you should make, document that. If it's something that you're having core, please make a patch, please contribute that back to the community, because, working in the support world, if you get a project that has been modified and you're not aware of that, it'll be a very bad time for you. So we're trying just to reduce that and just get everybody working on the same page, following Drupal best practices. So for establishing the process early on, we want to set expectations and maintain transparency. What I mean by that is when you first have that initial interaction with the client. So without getting too heavy into the project management aspect of Drupal development, you would still want to set the expectations about where the work's going to be done, how it's going to be delivered, the time frames, the tools that are going to be used, anything that's going to be specific to your development operations. You want to make that documented, put it out there, make the client aware, as well as the people working for you. So we have a lot of developers that actually work with us, and we've worked with them over the past that come from independent development. They come from doing things themselves. So trying to get everybody on the same page, follow that process, and not have anybody doing silo development, not nobody doing their own specific thing that's only specific to them that they're aware of. Everybody needs to be on the same page. Everybody needs to follow the same process. That way you can actually build your site, build your features that work well with everybody else. Maintaining the same workflow as far as repository management, as far as how you do your branching, how to do the merges, when the merges are actually taking place and how they're taking place. That needs to be very well documented. And again, it's just setting the expectations from the beginning. Going back from with the client, but as well as the people that you're working with, and the ones that are working underneath you, as well as up the chain too. So letting your project managers know if there's anything that deviates from the process, let them know what that's doing, and why you're doing it. Centralized staging environment. This is something that most shops do, but this is the place where the client goes and QAs the website. So if you're actually building a site, you don't want to have everything stuck on your local. You actually want to put this on a server, something that can be accessed from the internet that actually has a public URL, preferably protected with HTTP authentication, something that's Google can't access. They can't actually see the site. It's like an index. If you have an e-commerce site, you don't have random people that discover your development site on Google, go there and buy the product, and then the client side, actually the end user, is wondering, where is my T-shirt? Where is my thing that I ordered 2 months ago? So that makes for an awkward conversation with your client, as well as very confused customer. So that's one example, but there are several reasons why you want to do that. It might not be ready for public viewing, but you still need that publicly accessible URL. You need to be able to send that link to a customer, to your client. They can see that, review that as time goes along, as well as people on the project to see where things are at, to see that that centralized staging branch that you use to integrate, integrate your Git branches and test that out before it gets moved on to the actual production server or the staging environment, or something like PANTHEON, Platform, Acquia, Rackspace, any one of the destinations that you may be working with. Client communication. Find a project management tool that fits your needs. There are tons of them out there. All of them have various features. Some of the ones we've worked with, Jira. Teamwork is very nice, very user-friendly from the front end for your clients. Not a whole lot you can do as far as customization if you want to add in additional features. They actually do a pretty good job of integrating with time tracking tools such as Harvest and Toggle. They also have integration with Google Business Apps, so being able to have kind of that centralized file storage, as well as documents that any documentation that you may have for your site. That's teamwork. There's also Basecamp, Redmine if you would like to host your own. The examples I have at the bottom, Jira, Teamwork, and Basecamp are all hosted services. Redmine is something that you would go and download, install on a vHost, and actually host it yourself. It's a great service. There actually are some, and with most of these, there are modules that you can install on a Drupal site if you run something like OpenHREM, that you actually have more custom integrations, but that may be kind of overwhelming for a client. You can actually use some of the other ones to funnel information into that, or use that for development communication. So project managers are awesome. Please use them. This basically means let them do their job. Let them actually be the ones maintaining the communication, setting the expectations for the client. Clients, unless absolutely required, should not be working with or communicating directly with developers unless there is a time that's scheduled. Let the developers do what they do best and build Drupal websites. A lot of times, I can't tell you how many times we've seen developers kind of go off on a go rogue and start talking to a client on Skype, and now there are all these new requirements that the project manager's not aware of, the team's not aware of, developer's aware of it, client's aware of it. Now, if something happens to the developer, the client still expects that. Nobody knows what's going on. So please always let your project managers maintain that overall control of the interaction between the team, the company, and the client. If there is a communication with a client or the person who is that or stakeholder, the project manager should be aware of every single thing that is going on with that project. Good project managers are typically on top of this, so that's not typically an issue in larger shops, but for smaller shops, ones just getting started out, or you may have somebody that's not terribly familiar with project management, maybe not so much with the Drupal or the web development scene. That's useful there. There's, as I mentioned, Skype. You would want to have dedicated channels to where you're actually talking about, communicating about a specific project. If you are using Skype, you can create as many channels as you would like. Have a channel for each one. You also want to find something that has high availability. Skype, yeah, it's okay if you're on a desktop client, if you're on a mobile client, or if you're out or in between work. A lot of us are remote developers, so maybe between our home and between the office, or maybe at a Drupal camp or DrupalCon, and we rely on the mobile phones. Skype is kind of problematic with that. Still useful, still has a lot of things, very accessible. Most people have Skype and know how to use it, so it's one of the reasons why it's very popular. It's been around for a while. HipChat, Atlassian, the same guys that make Bitbucket, Jira. HipChat, most people have actually mentioned this too. A lot of them hate it. They tried it when it first came out and had a lot of issues. Over the past 2 years, they've done a lot of development to HipChat. It is a Jabber-based client, so you don't have to use their client. You can use Adium, you can use Digsby. Pretty much any client that allows you to connect to a Jabber client, you can use with HipChat. Also, you can use the actual client that Atlassian puts out. It's a very clean client. There's a lot of really interesting integrations with Beanstalk, Bitbucket, GitHub. So when things on your product, say branches get merged or new commits that happen, automated deployment setup, you actually get notifications right in the chat. So if you're actually working on a project and a lot of people are making commits, that's a really nice way for everybody to know when something has been committed, know when something has been merged, something has been deployed, this is ready for QA. That's just automated. You don't have to worry about it. It just happens. It's a great program. It's actually free. They have a free service. They have a premium service, which gives you kind of a, more of a group video chat feature. There is Google Hangouts, which actually does, I think, in my opinion, is more superior as far as the video group chat. But for an ongoing conversation that you're having about a particular project, or as development processes, HipChat is fantastic. Viber is another one. Very good voice communication with your client. It is probably, and the nice thing about that is one of the features with Viber that we've found that's very nice if you ever have to run out. Some of our project managers, and actually I'm sure a lot of us have kids or Times where they're on a call and they have to go pick up the kids or go do something, or have to leave and for a moment, you can actually switch over from your phone to your mobile, from the mobile to back to the computer very seamlessly. It's almost magic. Very, very nice chat client. Lacks a lot of the third-party communication though. HipChat, so far from what we've seen, without actually going and building something that's very custom with IRC, has a lot of functionality right out of the box, and it's free. It's definitely worth checking out. So all of that was just about communication, so keeping everybody on the same page of the project, knowing what's going on, and making everybody aware of the details, communication, what's happening with the project. There's some issues. Big deal with that is if you get stuck on something, you can reach out to one of your coworkers or associates for help. Now, this brings us to local development. Local development is something that's been around for a long time. And when I mean by local development, I mean people that install Man, people that use VirtualBox, people that even use Vagrant. Very cool service, does a lot of stuff, but there are a lot of drawbacks to local development. Some of the drawback, well, the most obvious one is if I'm working on a Drupal site, I might be able to see this on my local host, but nobody else can, unless you go through and actually set up your router, do some port forwarding, maybe set up a virtual host for that one machine. Sure, it can be done. There's a lot more steps there, and none of which is developing Drupal websites. So you get a lot of time spent in basically working around the issues that you're going to come with local development. Plus, if you're dealing with say a support job where you actually pull down a database, you might have a lot of client-sensitive information on your laptop. Now, what if somebody steals your laptop? What if you lose it? If you're in an airport and it breaks? You don't want to be high and dry without your data. That's the main drawback with that. And the benefits, you can do some additional testing. There are some tools that it's easier to get local programs such as PHP Storm, Sublime Text, whatever your favorite IDE is. It's typically easier to kind of get that going if you actually have that on your local machine to mount a folder, open up a file. But with today, there are options out there. I mean, there is Transit for the Mac. There is WebDrive for PC, Linux, out-of-box supports mounting remote SSH shares. So you can still work with local programs on remote sites, which brings us to the next. Actually, I don't want to skip Calabox. Calabox, if you guys haven't or not, yes.
One of the other benefits is you do want, like you said before, a staging environment, but there can be times when you still want to have some localization where you want to see the changes. You don't want it in a staging environment. You want to have local staging for your own personal development because your team members are doing similar.
Right. So our answer for that is...
You do want that to be localized, and you do want that private.
Well, not necessarily. So if you have a staging, you're talking about maybe 3 environments in a remote server.
Think of it as 2 or 3 different branches.
Okay. In some of the solutions that we use, and I want to talk about some in a moment, it's not just 3 environments that we actually use on, say, a remote system. Every single branch is spawned, and you use this on a remote system. So every single time you have a branch or any change, we typically use branches for independent tasks. A lot of people use them for Will's branch, Roger's branch, Bob's branch. Everybody has their own specific branch. We do it more for task-based.
It should be task-based.
Right.
But yeah.
And typically why it's not is because going through and managing that is kind of a headache. There are some services, Platform is the one I'm going to mention here in just a few minutes, does that. PANTHEON's multi-dev service, it's kind of costly, but these options are kind of costly, and it really depends on the scale of the project, the client that's going to be using that. So there are some variables there to choose if you would or would not use that. Local development, though, the one thing about that is you're kind of putting a lot of trust onto your developers. And on top of that, the barrier of entry is a lot higher to actually get in and start doing that. Now, there are tools such as Calabox, which does make it really nice, really quick to spin up an instance, spin up a server. It's based on VirtualBox, does have Pantheon integration. So it is a very nice tool, and it's a very mature paradigm for working on sites. So it's been around there for a while. But the thing is, in this day, or this year and the future, there are going to be many, many more options. So getting out of the local development, putting it into the cloud, managing your branches, and actually working on that remote system, the benefits just far outweigh the drawbacks of local development.
I mean, that's your trust issues with security, trust issues with the cloud. So.
Yeah. But then again, compare that as far as the probability versus, I leave my laptop here, I go to the restroom, somebody runs and grabs it.
I'm okay with the cloud type thing, but I like to have a separation of an internal file. This is where our development stuff is.
Sure. Oh yeah. No,
our network.
Right. So what I'm talking about is cloud-based development, not so much as production hosting. So I mean, if you actually had kind of a lockdown environment on a server, say at Rackspace, which I had some issues with them this past week. Linode, I mean, there are tons and tons of options out there. Plus, today, servers are cheap. They're really cheap. So, I mean, it's not very costly. If you're actually already using VirtualBox and things like that to set up a localized environment, it's no different than going, spinning up a VPS, 8 gigs, or 2 if you want to have offload your database, or even DigitalOcean using Docker and some of the other more automated features to kind of do it your own, do it yourself type of environment, specifically for development. So we use, let's get to the next slide here. So we use a lot of, for most of our Git hosting, we use Beanstalk, which is a fantastic service. They do automated deployments, so that's very nice as far as once you actually push up, you can actually have a script that pulls that down to that centralized staging environment. And typically what we use for that is when someone pushes up a branch, you go there, you merge it, you test it there before it even gets there, or before it even gets to that staging or development environment that the client has. If you're using Acquia, PANTHEON, or Platform, that test environment for PANTHEON, staging for Acquia and Platform. Each of these services are a little bit different. They kind of operate. I mean, how many of you guys have actually used Acquia? So, some of you guys have. PANTHEON seems to be a little more, okay. Platform's kind of a new one, so. Okay. So Acquia, those of you who have worked with Acquia and that are familiar with Git, how standard is that? I mean, you're pushing up to, you create one tag, there's one branch, you push it up, and you roll back to it. But even the repos, if you actually pull down the repo, you get these extra folders. They get these extra stuff that's not like, they put the repo one back, and that itself, just where you're placing the repo, is kind of a hot topic now. I mean, most people typically do that in your Drupal doc root. Acquia does it one level back unless you're pulling down a specific tag, which then pulls the main one, so it's not, it's kind of all over the place as far as where they're actually doing that. So typically when you're working with Acquia, you're going to have to do some custom parsing scripts to actually get the changes to where they need to be without overriding permissions and actually getting your scripts and files before you do your permissions or your push up to Acquia. So there's a decent level of finessing and massaging prior to going up to Acquia. PANTHEON's a little bit better. They do make it a little bit more accessible. Both of these guys have additional, PANTHEON and Platform both have their own command line tools, so it makes it very accessible if you actually would like to build your own custom export scripts to go to these services. With shared development, these are just kind of the service providers that offer this sort of service. Like we were just mentioning earlier, we could go through and build your own environment. If you're already familiar with setting up a Linux stack and a LAMP stack and doing that on a VirtualBox, no different than doing on an actual system that, if you're working with more people, they can all access the same place, they can all access the same files. Somebody might have some trouble with some code or might have trouble with a module they need help configuring. Now, if that's behind their network, you can talk to them, you can screenshots, but sometimes it's a little easier just to log in there and see what's going on, have access to that code. So without actually gaining access to their private network at home or at their office, you're not going to have that. Now, most cases, most of your development shops, for the most part, are distributed. Drupal developers are hard to find. They're not something that you typically see a lot of people working in the same space. So you're mostly working with remote developers and relying on them to set up their home networks. Now, a lot of them are very bright people. A lot of them have that set up already, which is great. But you also want to have this set up to when people come in, they can just hit the ground running. They can go in there and do that. So going back to setting the expectations when they first come into the development process, when you're onboarding a new developer, give them all the information, give them access to what they need right out the door. You can actually have an account to a box that they can SSH and tunnel into, SSH to. They have access to their branches, they have access to their file systems, their structure, they have Drush, they have everything that they would on that local system. Some of the drawbacks of shared development, there are some, and this is a new space, by new space, I mean it's something that most of the industry is kind of really sold on the local development thing. Now that is going to go away eventually, and it is going to go away. I mean, there are some benefits. You might things maybe cache locally for a short period of time, but with more and more of these services coming out, these are becoming more attractive and they're becoming more affordable. So then you can also go through and, like I said, build your own systems if you like to do it yourself. If you prefer Jenkins, we typically don't use Jenkins to do that. We do a lot of feature-based development, VAs for the configuration management. So that knowing which modules work with features in this point in time is kind of a benefit. Things like core block modules, core content can't necessarily be featured out, but in most cases you're not doing content, and content is done on a staging environment and where that database is synced up. Typically you want to avoid ever pushing a database unless it's something that is premeditated, as in you're working in a full build project, the client's adding content to a centralized development server, which is something that they have access to and the developers don't touch. And then once they're done with that and you do your migration, that's where the database gets pushed. In most cases, you don't want to put a database up in a live environment. It's just asking for trouble. You lose data. And like I said, there are things such as Jenkins and some automated tools to help that process. But in most cases, it's just better to stay away from it if all possible. So some of the tools of the trade, as we mentioned, Acquia, Pantheon, and Platform. To talk about some of these, Pantheon, the multi-dev service, that is kind of costly right now. It's $400 per project per month, at the very minimum. But what that allows you to do is have a project and spawn virtually unlimited branches for that one project. So you can have personal branches. You can have a branch per task, which is most of the time the preferred method to do that because your branches are short-lived. You don't have to worry with merge conflicts as often. You don't have to worry about rebasing as much as if you were to have just a few branches, personal branches. Use version control the way that it was intended to be used. Terminus is Pantheon's command line tool. It's basically a Drush extension. It's very well documented online how to get this installed. It's very well built. It gives you a lot of options. It gives you a lot of options to interact with your sites that are hosted on Pantheon from your local machine. So again, there are still things that you can do with local development, but if you were doing this on the same concept would apply if you're working on a remote box where you build everything on the cloud and do that there, or use this on your private server, which is makes good for continuous integration. Continuous integration kind of goes back to lower level continuous integration. If I would say for smaller shops, you're adding new features, adding new, so if you have views or content types or things that you like to add to your site, updates the views, if you use features the way it should be used, it allows you to handle your merges and use Git to handle your deployments. Since you're not pushing up things in pushing up databases, you can just pull that down and very minimum to pretty much no site downtime if you're actually deploying that the proper way. And again, testing this prior to it being delivered, because the idea is that with that centralized staging environment, you're able to test that and you know what to expect in that remote environment. Platform, very similar to Pantheon. Both of these guys are hosted providers. They do actually have production hosting. They do offer, so you do have that live environment that is actually going to be your main.com. Where Platform is different is they are more, I would say, geared towards the branching aspect. So the multi-dev aspect of Pantheon, these guys give you out of the box for significantly less. I want to say it's $40 a month, roughly $30, $40 a month by default. I think their site is in euros, and I didn't do the translation before it came in here. But out of the box for the basic service, you get 3 environments. Wouldn't be so, or 3 different they call them environments, but they're essentially branches. You also have the testing and the production in addition to that. But on the development environment, they give you, it's a bare minimum. $40 a month, or roughly $40 a month. They give you the ability to have a few different branches. So you have personal branches that you would have your own instance of the site. So when you're working on the site and you have your changes, you would commit to your own environment or branch, and you can handle your merges into development and then go up the chain to staging and production, which again, provides some quick and dirty continuous integration. Like I said, you're having to rely on features, and Drupal 8 is going to be configuration management. But where you have changes and things on your site, so things that would typically be in the database, such as views, content types, rules, panels, things like that, that you could export to a feature or to a configuration, would then be in code, which could then be added or committed to the Git repository, which can then be pushed up the chain without having to actually touch the database. The only thing you would have to do is once it's there, just enable the module and clear your cache in most cases. Platform CLI, similar to Terminus, it is the Commerce guys that is their command line interface for platform. That is not actually a Drush extension. It's kind of a standalone package for Linux. It does require, I think, PHP 5.4 and Composer on your system to use, similar to Terminus. It gives you a few options. It's still a very new service. Platform CLI is even newer than Platform, but these guys are on top of it. If you follow if you watch the repo on GitHub, they're fairly verbose with the amounts of integrations and commits that they're doing. So it's a very actively, or it's a project that's under very active development at the moment. I give you multiple environments, so you still have your development, or your development, your staging, and your production. High availability, I'm kind of throwing that out there. These guys do white label Amazon Web Services, so Acquia does not actually own their servers. I mean, they lease them or resell them actually from Amazon Web Services. PANTHEON is very similar. They do the same thing for Rackspace, so they don't actually own their own servers. They own the service and the actual site that you go and the dashboard, do all that, but it's still, at the end of the day, it's still a Rackspace server in one of the regions. There's a lot of the drawbacks. We kind of touched on this one earlier. They do kind of have their own custom way of handling Git repos, and the way you push the tags. It's not standard. It's not that it doesn't work, and it's not that it doesn't make sense. It's just not the way that most people, when they get into Git and trying to understand how that works, it's not the methods that would typically be followed. And on top of that, it's not very well documented on how you would actually push that. You do have some documentation, a lot of pictures, but not very straightforward. This is how you do this for the initial branch. Typically what you would do to make that, to work with an Acquia account, is you would just clone the entire repo. You would have that base group on your local system or your shared system, whichever you prefer. I hope you would go to shared. But once you do that and you make your changes, then you would still want to sync that up, create a tag, and actually push back to that main repo with the tag, so you can then deploy that tag to the development staging or production environment. So in most cases, you would actually just use a branch, and you would push up to the branch, and that branch would be what's on that system. You would do snapshots along the way, just for more, tagging, more for notes, and just kind of adding to the timeline. But with PANTHEON or with Acquia, they kind of rely on that tagging structure to be the deployment points for each branch. So these guys, as far as I'm aware, don't have a command line tool outside of Drush. They rely on Drush aliases. So whenever you get access to an Acquia account, you would typically go and download the Drush aliases that are provided. Some of the other drawbacks, actually, with all of these services, Acquia, Platform, and PANTHEON, multi-sites, domain access sites, they don't support that. I mean, they do, but they don't. They don't actively support it. There are some hacks and ways around it to make it work, but it's not something that is very accessible through their really fancy UI that they put out there. Those are some of the additional drawbacks. And working with a lot of sites that are built elsewhere, you see a lot of different variations of how people build multi-sites, which make it a it's huge pain to sometimes then push out to Acquia, to push out to Pantheon. Pantheon has their preferred way of doing that, which is essentially building, if you have three different multi-sites, we'll build 3 sites. Some people like to do that anyway, but there are still benefits of using multi-site installation. It's still a core feature of Drupal and has been for a while. So if you're sharing the same code base, you're using the same modules, and only slight variations between sites, as well as you have content that you would want to, sometimes have it on 2 sites, sometimes on 3 sites, sometimes just on 1 site. Multi-site installation is still probably one of your best options when using Drupal for that. So none of these guys easily support that. It can be done, but it's just not straightforward. Following best practices for Drupal, modules. So if your site's all modules, in most cases all, you actually want to group these. You want to put all of your contrib modules in a contrib folder. You have custom features modules. Please don't put them in a custom folder. Put them in a features folder. If you have custom modules, put them in a custom module folder within sites all modules, or sites, whatever your site name is, sites default. There are a few different ways you can set that up depending on, but in most cases it's going to be sites all modules as that base. Again, develop with features, Drupal 7 and Drupal 6, configuration management with Drupal 8. Knowing how to use features. There are a lot of people that don't like features and been burned by features, and most of this has to do with the 1.0 or the 1.0 release of features, as well as the field bases. Issues that as you add a field to a feature, you're using that, you want to probably, if you're using this field in other modules, one option is to create separate fields for different content types. Now, what does that do? That adds another table to the database. So you have to worry about your database getting bloated just because you want to use features. Some of the common ways around that specific issue would be to create a feature just with your field bases. And as you make changes, make updates to them, add new ones, just maintain a field-based feature. Doing this allows you to export your custom-built Drupal sites into code, which could then be as part of your Git repository, which then allows you to start getting into the continuously move content or changes and functionality between one environment to another one, and deploying that via Git. Git repo placement. This is there are different times where you would want to push your Git repo, sometimes a directory back. Some people like to put it in their sites directory just to get the modules, the custom modules, the themes, because most of your Drupal sites, you would hope they don't have any hack ever happening, so that is one method of doing that, but the most common is going to be in the Drupal doc group. So where your index.php is in Drupal, that's where you want to put it. Drupal core, out of the box, comes with git ignore, already in that directory. So putting that there allows you just to conform to that and kind of be more of the standard, or follow the standard that actually comes out of the box with Drupal. And also just modules to complement development. So this kind of goes back to if you're in a development stage or development site where you have your local environment or your shared environment where you're actually building the site. Modules like reroute email to prevent email from being sent out to live customers or actual live users on the site. Cron emails that get sent out. Also, you would want to stage file proxy for your files directory. If they add new content or add new images, or you're missing images, there are modules to go out there and grab that stage file proxy. It's one of them to go out and grab images from the remote server if it's missing on the local system. Reroute email is another popular one too, but mostly just have a suite of modules that you're comfortable with that you only use on development. Devel is one of them. You never really want to have Devel in a live environment. I can say how many sites we've actually pulled down that actually have Devel in a live environment. It's kind of scary, but it's out there. Disable the PHP module. That's one of the earlier DevOps talks mentioned. PHP execs running in safe mode. If you don't want PHP enabled in a live environment, Acquia will actually yell at you if you do that and give you a really poor insight score, if you guys are familiar with that. And there's a fair number of modules that they would like for you to disable. Backup and migrate's another one. Very useful in some cases for pulling back databases for sites that you don't quite have SSH access to, but again, poorly managed and just set up to get a quick database. There are plenty of sites out there that actually just make database dumps straight to sites default files, which is now open to the world, and you can just go grab a database, and that's scary. So being able to identify the development modules and know how they work, knowing when to use them, when not to use them, and knowing how to prevent the bad issues or bad things that can come when improperly used.
On the Git repo placement, this might come from SVN paradigm, but can you do sub repos? For example,
yes.
say you're working on a project, you got a module that you're working on, you got to decide, let's go ahead and build this and make it a drip module. Can you
yes.
that
and by default, Git, if you have this custom module that you've created, and say this is in your site's all modules custom directory, say you add that module prior to initializing your Git repo in that subdirectory, you could run into some problems. And actually, the problem that you'll run into, it'll be more of confusion, because you'll see errors when you're trying to look for that clean repository. Because you always want to make sure that it's clean. It should always be clean. And if you're doing work, obviously it's not going to be. But once you're done with your work for the day, it's clean. But if you initialize that before you add anything, before you actually do the that initial commit, yes, it'll actually just ignore that directory. Do that. So in a lot of cases, what you'll see too is you have libraries such as, I'll just be jQuery, but like Views Cycle, if you're using Views Slideshow, for example. There are a lot of modules and a lot of libraries that allow you to have a Git repo, and it's nice to use that Git repo so you can grab the most the latest version, you make any modifications, you can push that back up to fork it, make a patch, or do whichever, or in your case, a custom module that you're working on that you would actually push out to Drupal.org. What you would want to do is just create that module. First thing to do is initialize a new Git repo, push up to it, and just add the files. Once they're added, Git by default, unless there is a custom configuration with it that may have come from a quick copy and paste off the internet to override those settings, will typically ignore that. But yes, it can. If you're having trouble with it, it's definitely something that you can do. So maybe check the configuration, but by default, it should already. So it's pretty smart. And yeah, and that kind of just takes up the question, or most of the presentation. And again, this is kind of to be a very high level, just kind of an overall process of DevOps. Some of the tools that are out there, some of the services that are out there, some of the ideas and concepts behind development. Again, local development is just a paradigm that has been around for a long time. Cloud hosting, one was nowhere near as cheap as it is today, way back then. Also wasn't just as available as it is today. So really, there's no huge reason to do that. Plus, there's also a lot of benefits that come. Can't Chattanooga. I don't have to worry about my machine that has all my programs and all of my settings back at my office. I got my laptop here, and I'm just as accessible to my work here as I am anywhere else. We do a fair amount of traveling on. And a lot of clients, for training and on-site meetings that we have, being able to just pick up a laptop and go is a nice feature. But being able to just make sure your laptop's charged, that's the only prerequisite for going on your trip. That's nice. Plus the added security aspect too, that you're not kind of relying on one machine. The idea is that you could take your laptop or computer, chuck it out the window, go down to Best Buy or Micro Center, pick up a new one, and begin working within the hour. That's kind of the idea. So you're not prevented from working by not having that one computer. Now it is nice, and everybody here, I'm sure, is very attached to their computer and takes very good care of it. I would hope everybody has a higher security standard, not to just let that kind of out into the open. Password protect your machine, please. That's a big thing. Mostly just common sense stuff, though. I mean, that's the thing. But reducing the barriers to entry, that's the thing too. If you can actually have something in that shared environment, something where you can actually maintain branching, maintain your repos, and handle all that from a UI, it makes it a lot easier. You don't have to rely on people being very familiar with Drush, very familiar with command line. Now, I would love for everybody to be that way. To make a lot of our jobs much easier. But in the case of this, the biggest thing is that Drupal developers are expensive. They tend to be, have to know a lot of information, all about Drupal, all about PHP, and in most of our case, or at least my case, and most of the people I've talked to, they come from kind of, that's why I have my own. I've had my own shop for a local place, and I was more selling websites than Drupal development, but I just really like Drupal, and I built everything in Drupal, even when it probably should not have been in Drupal. But doing that, I kind of developed my own workflow, kind of developed my own paradigm, my own processes for doing that. Then once I start, move to an environment where I was working with other people, you couldn't really rely on that local machine as much as you used to. Now, still, I'm not telling you go throw your local servers out the window. Don't forget that exists. There are still some, very, very nice benefits of having that. Having that local machine, having the local development, having the tools that are out there. Calabox is one I kind of glossed over that is a very nice local development tool. It integrates with PANTHEON, makes it very quick. I should give you a quick demo since we're at the end here. But being able to just, fire up Calabox and get this local environment, and it's running. I want to see my sites. So Calatest. I think it's been a while since I've been.
Is Calabox convertible to Vagrant?
Kind of.
Actually uses Vagrant.
Yeah, it uses Vagrant to actually build the environments, but
Like a package over the top of Vagrant.
yeah, it uses Vagrant and it uses VirtualBox. And actually, if you go and download Calabox, it basically is a wrapper for VirtualBox. That's what it's actually using to build it. Partially, it's actually using VirtualBox to build that initial environment. Vagrant to provision that and get the right versions of Apache, right versions of MySQL, or whatever it's configured with. You can do some customization to it. It's still a 1.0 release. It actually recently had a Kickstarter to raise more money to go with a 2.0 release, make that more accessible, and to bring it to Windows and Linux. Most people that run Linux can just run Apache and MySQL there. So Windows is, I think, the big focus for them now with the 2.0 distribution. But also making it open source, actually making that source available to where the community can actually work on that. If they want to add a new feature, add new functionality, they can do that. Now it's still kind of at this moment in time, it's still kind of the most part proprietary system. Calamuna is the company that's behind it. Very cool site though, but again, not very accessible URLs. You would have to rely on your end user to go into their host file to make that happen there, which typically you wouldn't do. You would use this, you would push it up to another environment where they would use for testing that is publicly accessible. But this is nice if you're on a place that you don't quite have internet connectivity. You might be on a plane, you might be, I don't know, at your grandma's house up out of a lake that has no internet. That's kind of a strange place to be, but hey, it happens. There are occasionally times where you find yourself without internet, but still would like to work. Calabox is one. Yeah. So yeah, and the other thing too. So configuration, Pantheon authentication to log in and control your Pantheon sites. Really cool service. It's free. Definitely worth checking out. But as I mentioned, right now it's only available for OS X, so only for Mac users.
So you talk about local, you talk about shared. What about remote where you're not on a shared system? You talk about Pantheon, heckling up Pantheon platform. What if you're going remote on the node or Rackspace?
Perfect. No, when I say shared environment, that's actually what I'm referring to. So it is more accessible from the outside, more accessible to users. I would actually give you a demo here. We're on Rackspace, and we were part of the region that had a lot of issues yesterday. If you guys follow the whole Rackspaces on Twitter, it's just a big string of sorries. But yeah, so we use Rackspace, but Linode, we're actually considering switching to Linode, actually partially Linode and AWS for our file system storage. So you can use a combination. So basically, the sole requirement is that you have root access on a Linux box. So
if you do AWS, play around with the especially if it's play around with the line, whatever it is you end up with, it can be slow.
Oh yeah, yeah. We're playing around a few different ideas as far as file system storage, because the biggest thing is just having it elastic, having something that we can scale up without having to worry about it hitting. We have some clients that have 500 gigs to a terabyte worth of file system storage, which is crazy, but That's the benefit of having a scalable system, something that's vertically scalable. As you mentioned, with Node is actually fairly scalable. I mean, as far as now since they have switched over to pretty much 100% SSDs, great for performance, but a little more costly as far as actual storage. So that's why we're kind of looking at some other alternatives that are out there. As compared to say DigitalOcean, for example, the process of getting more space is a little bit more tedious. I mean, you gotta make a copy of your take a snapshot of your environment, you destroy it, which always so you destroy your environment and basically re-roll one with more space. So but then if you're working with multiple environments at once, with the IPs change and that kind of gets out of whack, so then you have to go change.
You do if you do a copy and then remake it and then destroy, you are going to change your IP.
Right. Yeah. So if you don't follow that process and basically do the right steps,
I refer that as the DO3 step.
Oh man, DigitalOcean is awesome. Don't get me wrong; they have fantastic integration, which gives you really awesome APIs to work with.
Real reason.
And it's cheap SSDs. I mean, it's great. I mean, $5 a month for I think about 20 gigs worth of storage, 512 megs of RAM, which is nice for just a little test box. That's cheap. I mean, if you're just wanting to test it out, to kind of test the waters with that shared hosting environment, that's a great place to start.
Just don't do 2 accounts at once.
Yeah, right.
You'll be fine.
Yeah, well, Node is good too. Like, say if you want to increase hard drive space, it's a little more vertical. All you would have to do is just basically buy more space, resize the drive, reboot the machine. Now you've got more space. AWS has more elastic capabilities, where it's more of a metered service. It's where you pay for what you use, which is good and bad. Bad because you might forget about it. You're not paying extra for a lot of things that you don't quite need. So that can be kind of painful to see some of those bills. But if you stay on top of it, you can keep it fairly well managed.
Plus you're sizing a box in this, it's whole.
Yeah, it's not fun. So I mean, I would say just go out there and get used to the different options that are out there. I mean, each have their own benefits, their own drawbacks. Aqua, like I said, has quite a few. I try to stay away from them. They do have some nice features. Being able to, high availability through their CDNs is nice. So not really being able to put a site somewhere and not really worried about a traffic spike as much as you would say, your own managing your own Linode box or DigitalOcean droplet. That's nice, but you pay for it. I mean, it's costly. Costs a lot more money than those other options too. But they do have fairly good support. Again, you pay for that too.
Well, what about remote development on a local machine versus remote development in the cloud?
Okay, so you're saying remote development on a local machine, as in you say you have a really nice Linux box that's in your own house or office or something, or?
For example, you set up your Windows. You're able to develop on your local machine using, let's say, PHP Storm. It connects remotely to your system, and you're doing your local ID versus remote ID. Cloud9 is a remote ID. It's pretty powerful.
I've actually heard a few other people recommend that. I haven't checked it out personally, but it was one that's high on the list to take a look at. Typically, in that situation, to work local on a remote environment. I use things like with the Mac, because I use all systems all day. So I mean, my normal machine at work is a Windows machine, which is a Windows machine. Here's Mac at home. I have a Mac and Windows machine that are running Synergy. There's pretty much always a terminal. No.
Then why Windows?
Well, it's more because specifically I still like computer games, and DirectX is the main thing. So some of the games that I play only work on Windows, but I still have.
See, there for a thin moment, I thought I was going to throw you a bone and say, well, so that I'll have Internet Explorer tested.
Yeah, well, it's there.
We have theaters for that.
I'm not a theater. I'm more on the back end. But see, I use PuTTY and MC PuTTY, and the combination of those two is my absolute most favorite SSH terminal ever.
check out Mac, because I think you'll actually make a switch.
No, I've heard, you're like the fourth person that's told me that in the past month, and it was like a very similar description, so I'm probably going to have to go check it out.
I love PHP stuff, so I'm like, reluctant to switch, but I'm liking the idea of being able to work immediately from anywhere, anytime. And that actually gives you that power, because you can pull up a browser, and you've got a very powerful IDE.
And it also has shared, and correct me if I'm wrong, doesn't it also have the ability for, say if Roger and I are both working on the same file, that we can both see there and see the code that changes. Yeah, that's pretty cool. There was a Flowbit, or actually Sublime Text is it's a really lightweight, and most people probably heard that by now. I use that in Flowbits, which allows you to kind of have that shared workspace to be working on the same document as somebody else is making changes. You see it in real time. But as far as being able to have a way to use local programs, like using source code from a remote repository or remote location, with a Mac, there's iTransit, there's CyberDuck. Both of these allow you to connect to, now this actually does connect to our Rackspace server that is potentially has a null route. Thank you, Rackspace. But CyberDuck is a way that you can actually mount a remote SSH share locally, so you can still use things like PHP Storm. You can still use your local programs, but be working on source code that's in a remote location. If you're using Windows, there is WebDrive, which is fantastic. Very similar process. You mount a network drive, so you can have a drive X that is your Rackspace served TripDuck directory, where you can access all of your projects that you're working on. Yeah, so I mean, like in Linux, it basically comes with support out of the box. So it's Linux is pretty fair. They do well on their own. But yeah, so that's it. I guess any more questions, or getting close to being out time. So all right. Well, thanks for coming, guys, and enjoy Chattanooga and enjoy the rest of the Drupal camp. Thanks.
Disclaimer: he is the only Windows native person we have.
I like to call it platform, being platform agnostic. Being familiar with all. I also own a computer, or actually a tech support service company in the same place where.
He is too.
We have Windows because our other side of our company is Windows Development Clarity. So it's a lot easier.
Oh yeah, and there's a lot of companies that they have invested in. Plus, Microsoft still has really good support. Apple's out there too, but as far as enterprise support, that's one of the big things that Microsoft has going for them. In a lot of places, a lot of companies, and a lot of governments, and whether it's local or state government, that they are very invested in with licensing and things like that. So, yeah, I've got some stories about some IIS stories. So that's for sure. Yeah, I guess I could.